If there's not enough incentives for three bedrooms to be built, there really isn't any reason from a developer's stance to do many of them. That's why you see them kind of in the penthouses, but families with kids don't necessarily want to live in a penthouse. I guess what I'd like to see is more aggressive approaches on a municipal level.
Welcome to The Flow, Real Estate and Money Show, a show focused on helping Canadians understand the different elements of real estate, mortgage, and finance. The goal of our show is to provide Canadians with the tools, information, and knowledge to have more success when it comes to their investing and real estate related decisions going forward. My name is Alex McFadden, and I'm your host. I can't wait to get you into the flow. It's not even first thing in the morning anymore. It's 11:15. This is my third coffee of the day. It's been a good day so far. Thank you, Jamie, for joining us back on the podcast. What a way to get started here, talking about coffee and all the good things in life. So happy to have you come back on. Now, I'm thinking about drinking coffee. You're probably thinking about drinking beer. Before we get into all real estate things, I don't even want to get into real estate yet. Tell me, how is the beer market doing right now, and how are things going in the beer world, Jamie? Because you're one of the owners of Steel Oak. I know you didn't think I was going to go that way, but we're going there first.
Yeah, despite popular belief, beer is a breakfast beverage. It can be enjoyed at all hours of the day, so don't think it has to be noon. It is great with as your first drink of the day. No, I am fortunate to be part of Steel Oak. 10 years ago, it's our 10th year this year. 10 years ago, a long-time, lifelong high school buddy and I took a risk that we didn't anticipate to go so deep. And we both jumped into the beer business. Now, granted, he runs the beer brewery. I'm just a pretty side face, and I focus on real estate. So I have more real estate stories than beer stories these days.
Oh, nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that. And if you listeners have not checked it out, and if you're local, if you live in the Lower Mainland, you got to go check out Steel Oak. Great place. No paid ads here, of course. New Westminster. There we go. Jamie, let's get into it, man. So I think that's a great way to get started, because the whole purpose of today's conversation is to have you help me walk through a whole evolution of the recent changes in the housing market, whether it be budgets and taxes and just things that have happened in the last couple of years, and how that's evolve the way that you think about real estate investing. As a quick reminder to any of the guests, years ago, Jamie and I did a podcast, and he came on and graciously shared years and years of experience in all the different ways that he would invest in real estate. And we both agreed that, looking at this 2.5 years later, there's things that you might do differently. So why don't we start off there, Jamie, and talk a little bit about, because it has been honestly about 2 years, what are some of the things that you think about today that really changed or shifted your mindset as it relates to real estate as a whole and investment?
I mean, as a whole, the market in the last few years has been crazier than I've ever experienced. I guess for those that don't know me, I've been a licensed realtor since 2008. So I'm in my 16th year now, and been through a few market cycles. When I first got licensed, there was a market crash right after in 2008, 2009. I think the difference with this one is prices are a lot higher. And I always felt that if rates got this high for an extended period of time, the sky would fall. And I mean, if it holds, the sky might fall, but it's tough times for a lot of people. I mean, as you know, this is your world. Mortgage payments are doubled in a lot of cases, and prices are still remaining high. And then there's more changes on the way with capital gains, with tenancy laws, with you name it, ban of foreign buyers, flipping tax, all these things that are brought in to help ease, I guess, a housing crisis. I think in short, when I look back at where my head was, when I first got into real estate, it was because I was a young landlord at that time. I was ambitious. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in New Westminster, and I had a 1-bedroom rental condo in Burnaby, and I had a second 1-bedroom rental condo in downtown at the Woodwards building. And I felt like, oh, this is great, getting ahead. Early investor, had a lot of success with it. I tend to find, though, I'm a type that doesn't sit still, and I have a lot of thirst for learning and trying and getting knowledge. And I'd observe, I guess at that time, my 1-bedroom condos sitting there and doing their thing. And I'd observe builders adding value to land and building structures, and whether they were selling them or renting them, they're adding value. And I really myself get a kick out of construction and development. I love design and architecture. I just love the way, I love a well-built home, and I love how cities are planning. So, I mean, a side tangent will be a discussion about the density rules that are coming with the change there. That's going to bring a lot of exciting opportunities. But for me, early days, a 1-bedroom condo was a boring investment, and I wanted to do other things. So I chased some cash flow properties in Atlanta, Georgia that failed. And I learned from that, don't invest in areas you don't know or don't want to go to. So that was my lesson learned there. and then pulled out of that, built a few homes, renovated a few homes. And I'm still a landlord with a few investment properties, but when I look back, I really complicated my life with construction and development. I moved my family a lot, built a lot of homes. I renovated more than I needed to. And if I kind of kept it simple and just stayed put and kept buying 1-bedroom apartments and renting them out, I'd probably be well ahead of where I am today. But I wouldn't have the experiences and war stories to share with you. So
something to be said for that.
And today what I'm doing is I'm really stuck in yesterday's decisions. Ultimately, when you do projects, you buy land, they take a few years to implement. And also when you buy land at 3% rates and it goes to 7% rates, sometimes your plans go on hold for a little bit. So it's not the best time to hold land, but you hold what, I made my decisions yesterday and I'm going to see them through.
Well, first of all, thank you for introducing yourself. I could have done a better job. I should have probably prefaced by saying, but thank you you did such a good job of that. And it's one of the reasons that obviously I reach out to you, because you're such a straight up guy. You've done these things. There's no bull crap. And you tell it how it is, which I love. Of course, buying properties in Atlanta to building and selling homes that you lived in. Yeah, you're right. I think that what that is, it's a reminder for a lot of people of that. Well, first of all, that not every type of investment is made for every single person. But let's go back here. So starting off, 1-bed condos, so just buying condo properties. What was your strategy there originally? Were you refinancing them? Were you just buying and renting them out? Like, how are you acquiring more real estate? Because that's something that a lot of people ask about right now.
Yeah, I was my 20s at this time, and ultimately, I was refinancing them to. I'd pull out as much money as I could. I was taking if the banks would lend me money, I would use that money to either build a home or buy the next condo. At first, it was condos, and then I built my first home around the age of 27 or 28. At that time, that structure was a 2,400 square foot home. Made a ton of mistakes. Took over existing plans. My main floor had 8-foot ceilings. Can't believe I did that. Still embarrassed about that today. But that house cost $330,000 in hard cost construction. And right now that's the cost of like a laneway house. So times have changed since then. But sorry, what was the, I went on a tangent there. What was the original question?
That's okay. No problem. My original question was, how are you going about the process of acquiring these 1-bedroom
using
properties? And what was your, refinancing? Were you house hacking? Were you moving into them? What were you doing?
It was refinancing. And also at that time, I was fortunate that the first round of properties I bought were in, 2002, 2003, 2002 to 2006. So they had some market gain and equity. I also remember reflecting at times that if the market wasn't upward trending, say it was flat for 5 years, it's not a fun experience being a landlord in a flat market. Like being a landlord is rewarding when you see, I say that with a Vancouver mindset. When the cash flow isn't exciting and the upside is really what keeps you there, a flat market still you start questioning, your strategy. When the cash flow is phenomenal, you're not worried about upside potential. But I was lucky enough that in my early days, I did have some equity gain with my first acquisitions, and I was able to use that to build a house. And I was able to, I leveraged as much as possible, essentially.
Got it.
And I was a young realtor hustling. So I had some, when I first got in the industry and first experienced success, I remember my first full year in the business, I paid more taxes than I'd ever made in any previous year of my life. So it was early days, young and ambitious, making more money than I'd made before and willing to take more risks because I had nothing to really lose. And I wanted to learn as much as possible. So probably I made a lot of, let's call it wisdom decisions, where you try to justify it by the wisdom you get versus the loss you took. But
there were some good takeaways around that. Sorry to cut you off here, but some things I'd love to hear your feedback on this, because I get people who reach out to me and they're relatively quote unquote young, hustling, trying to figure, okay, so I want to acquire real estate. I live in the Lower Mainland, or I live in the Fraser Valley, and I want to do it here. And for most of them, it's hard enough just buying that first home as a whole, let alone trying to buy property 2, 3, or 4. There's been a significant amount of changes since 2010 or 2008, 2012, mostly mortgage related and price related, but it's still very doable. So my question for you is, if you were to try and do what you did back then, like what you did back then, if you were to try to do that today, would you do that again? And if not, what would you do differently today?
I do more house hacking. I think really that is a great way for a lot of people to get ahead. And whether that's buying a single family home and putting a basement suite in it, or even better, if you're able to get 3 suites in a dwelling and live in the smallest, most modest one. I think house hacking is something I never did that I would highly recommend to anyone. Like as long as the structure is good, you can cater a few dwellings. I think you can get very far ahead with that. Also, when you do the math on it, if you can create 3 units out of a house and you get some land behind it, often you're ahead of what you could do with buying single family apartments. Not single family, individual apartments. But the 2 strategies that come to mind is just the small 1 bedroom. I love them. Like it used to be the 600 square foot 1 bedroom. Now it's the 500 square foot 1 bedroom, or 550, you name it. A good floor plan, nice outlook, not the worst one, not the best one, just something modest that attracts a good tenant. I think that's a great strategy for most in terms of a low maintenance, low time investment way to slowly get ahead. And the house hacking's for someone that's willing to live in a little bit more, live around your tenants, potentially, ideally, do a little more work to improve a structure. And you're taking probably a little more sacrifice in your living quarters if you're house hacking, but both are phenomenal. Yeah.
Got it. And so, I mean, just to define that for anybody listening who wasn't familiar with the term house hacking, obviously it's a whole category of basically buying and owning real estate, but it's essentially living within the rules and means, but finding unique and creative ways to essentially use them to your advantage. An example of that would be to buy a 2-bedroom property and get a tenant in your other room. So get a roommate, which is an option. Another example, that'd be to put say 5 or 10% down, live in that property, do something similar. And then a year or 2 or 3 years removed, pull equity out or use the extra savings that you had to buy the next home with CMHC again and rent out that existing property. But I don't disagree with you, like finding ways to creatively, whether it be a detached house or a condo, get rental income from those units is definitely a different way to do it.
I think we should acknowledge too, house hacking is kind of a privilege when you get to a higher price point in the city. If you're a first time buyer, it's hard to house hack a 1-bedroom apartment. So let's just, maybe the angle there is that the 1-bedroom first time buyer house hack is to rent out your apartment and find cheaper rent somewhere else. But really house hacking, what I'm referring to is buying a house, adding a suite, maybe a second, maybe 2, living in the basement, renting up the upstairs for higher rent, and just getting ahead that way. That's the most common way.
Yeah, well said, well said. So that would be one way that you would do it. Let's kind of move forward a little bit here and talk a little bit about, and we're going to weave this into the conversation because we're talking a few years later, we're talking about a lot of changes. There's been, the market, COVID, rates, terms, all this kind of fun stuff going on right now. And in part of our evolution, we brought this up earlier. Well, our federal government is changing the game for tenants and renters, which obviously affects landlords. Yes. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? This I don't know if we want to get too deep on this whole Bill of Rights, but maybe just a general overview and how this could impact your desire to invest going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. I guess just the overarching, the advice I've heard from listening to podcasts over the last decade and just people that are doing things bigger than me is beds and sheds are the #1 investments. So what they mean by that is sheds are industrial and beds are, residential rentals. So I've taken that, okay, invest in beds and sheds, and industrial is really expensive and residential's not. So most people go residential, which is what I've done. The second thing that I've kind of heard over and over as a message from investors and people that have done more is that their biggest regrets are usually selling. So, when it comes to rentals, buying stuff that you want to hold for the long term is, ideally the best strategy. So, when I have an investor, I guess the way my mind works now is, well, industrial beds and sheds, if those are the 2 kind of real estate rules, and, there's obviously exceptions to that. I'm in the beds department because sheds are expensive and the industrial real estate's very expensive. And the beds department's apartments, or whether it's multi-family or single family homes, the draw of residential is that it's possible for the small player, you can whether you're a landlord to a 1-bedroom or landlord to a duplex, you're at a much lower price point than other commercial real estate options. The thing that I think that what's coming to play that, Alex, you're kind of getting into is these new tenancy rules that are coming in. My biggest concern with that is it's already what I'm seeing as a real estate agent, that landlords aren't really a lot of them aren't really happy with being landlords right now, whether they have a tenant that's paying under market rents, or whether they're just tired of dealing with rental headaches. this has been one of the markets where landlords cash out. And with land, the big thing is I think it's important to incentivize more landlords. We need more housing. We need more people to buy an apartment at a pre-sale that they're going to rent it out. We need more people willing to rent out their basement suites. And we don't want to, anytime they create legislation that protects a tenant, I mean, their heart's in the right place for the existing tenants, but they're really kind of doing it at the consequence of pinching future supply by reducing the amount of people that want to get into it. And so I kind of think like, yes, the optics are good as a politician to say, let's make it from 2 months to 4 months notice. Reality is, does 4 months really improve their situation? And to me, I don't think so. I'd probably choose 3 months if they need more time over 4. And then, there's all these other small things. Like this is a random one, but there was talk about if someone owns 5 units or more, you can't do an eviction to move in. So basically if I'm moving into a property, for example, the rule is, and I have a tenant, let's say I have a tenanted 4-plex, for example. If I decide, I'm going to move my whole family into that 4-plex, right now I can give eviction notice to the occupants, and I'm moving my whole family in. And the rule is, I'd have to live there for 6 months currently to show good faith that I'm not just re-renting it at market rents right away. I mean, the reality is if I was moving my whole family into a 4-plex, I'd probably be doing that for the purpose of trying to get market rents. But for this example, let's assume not. So one of the, I guess, where am I going with this is that I can move in, but I have to be there for 6 months. Now they're going to up that legislation to 12 months, which I think is fair. It shows good faith that you're going to occupy a property, because I've had experience stories that if you don't move into a property and you evict a tenant unlawfully, you're going to be on the hook for 12 months, potentially 12 months of their market rent that they're going to pay. So if you do it lawfully and you live there for 12 months and you do, whether it's regardless of what it is, I think that's a good thing. The 4-month notice, I don't think that's a good thing. The upcoming density change where they're talking about small scale multi-unit zoning, where they're going to allow for 4 to 6 units on a single family zone property. I'm really curious how that goes, because there's going to be a major incentive for people to create extra dwellings and rental units. And if you can fit 5 units on a single family zone lot and you rent them all out, what if you decide your kids and you want to move in there and take it over one day? There's legislation saying if there's 5 or more units, you can't. So I don't know how that's going to evolve. There's a lot of unknowns. And these are really minor one-off things, Alex. So I mean, the overarching thing is that the trends are working towards more protection for the tenant, which is reducing the appeal to be investing in the space and become a landlord. So the concern is that might pinch the supply. And then in the short term, I just don't think, I don't think a 4-month notice that's going to hurt some real estate transactions, Alex. A lot of buyers want vacant possession, and
no doubt
with 4 months notice.
Well, not to even mention the financing implications of trying to purchase a property that has an investment component to it. Today, as you and I both know, if someone's purchasing a property and the tenant is not out by the time they take possession, this is essentially, for all intents and purposes, a rental property, which changes the ball game. It changes the interest cost. It changes the qualification criteria. It changes everything. And so that's actually, not to digress here too much, but that's actually a point or a conversation that a lot of people have brought up to me. Funny enough, now it's like, okay, so if I have to evict somebody and it's 4 months, but I have a 4-month rate hold, what happens there? Well, actually, I don't know. I mean, I guess we could assume that you'd probably have to reset that rate hold, but that's at a huge disadvantage to the potential buyer. Anyways, well, I think that's something that will probably unfold as we find out more information. But I get your point. The reality is there should be some better rules in place for existing tenants in some situations. I don't disagree with that. I mean, they're humans, they're people, they're just renting instead of buying. So we shouldn't treat them anything less than anyone else. But the flip side to that is if you own the real estate, it is your decision, obviously, to move into it or live in it. So there shouldn't be repercussions for someone who's actually lawfully doing that. I think like at the end of the day is they're trying to, my opinion on the matter is probably the same as yours, where they're trying to get rid of the people who are, not actually moving into the properties and just evicting people. But that is like 1 out of 1,000 people. I mean, like for the 1 out of 1,000 people who do it, there's not, obviously 999 landlords that are not trying to do that sort of thing. And so it's unfortunate that that's what it comes down to. But okay, so here's my question for you, because the key here is, what would Jamie do? How are you approaching that? in a nutshell, you don't need to, right now on the spot with the information that you have, does that make you less inclined to invest into real estate, or is that changing what you're purchasing today if you were about to purchase something residentially in BC as rental?
You know, when I look at all the legislation, the small one bedroom still seems pretty appealing to me. So when it comes, and there's a number of reasons why I like the small one bedroom. One, with a 500 square foot one bed, so I guess what would I do? There's nothing like, even today at the level, even though I don't have a single one bedroom rental property, that's a genuine strategy that I love. And I love it because they're relatively liquid. Ideally it's a simple math. When you can afford to buy the next one, you do it. You just keep buying one bedroom apartments that rent out. The appeal to me is that people don't live in 500 square foot one bedrooms for 10 years, 20 years. So there's more turnover, which used to be a negative that you get more turnover. But when rents are changing, that's a positive. So ideally, I'd like a property type where the typical occupant might turn over every 2 to 4 years. And to me, that's a one bedroom. My biggest concern with the way things are going is it really doesn't incentivize owning family homes or being an investor behind family homes. And I would love, like, a future ambition would be to create family living that is rental based, like 3 bedrooms. Every community needs more 3-bedroom homes. I'd love to create that. So the reason I'd love to create it is because, one, it's middle housing, that it would be a very rewarding thing for anyone that gets a kick out of development to do. You're creating family homes. The things that go against you for creating 3 bedrooms is, like, if it's let's call it a stratified property or something that you can resell. If you can resell it, oftentimes on a price per square foot, like particularly with apartments, 3-bedroom apartments compared to 1-bedroom apartments, there's a reason why developers do a lot of smaller units. There's always exceptions to certain areas, but call it New West or Burnaby, you're going to do the pro forma, the financials, the profit's going to work out better with smaller units. So if cities don't incentivize 3 bedrooms to be built, if there's not enough incentives for 3 bedrooms to be built, there really isn't any reason from a developer's stance to do many of them. That's why you see them kind of in the penthouses, but a lot of families with kids don't necessarily want to live in a penthouse. So I guess what I'd like to see is more aggressive approaches on a municipal level, and on maybe there's other levers they can pull that incentivize 3 bedrooms. And what I mean by that is increase the density. If municipalities can increase the density, do it. Eliminate building fees for 3 bedrooms. Like DCCs, all those charges to get a permit to start construction. I'm going to throw up a figure here that I have an example of a development where 1 bedroom might have $15,000 to $16,000 in city fees. If there was a 3-bedroom, it would technically, if it was double the size, it would technically be double the fees. But I think they should eliminate that because they need to encourage it. Anything that creates more 3 bedrooms should be considered. Is my thought.
So I think a lot of what you said, it touches on a nerve for a lot of people, because one of the things that I've been screaming and yelling from the rooftops is that while our federal government, which I don't want to make this too political here, but while our federal government is basically talking, at least most recently in the announcements, okay, we're going to give a whole bunch of cash here to CMHC, we're going to build a whole bunch of apartments, essentially. But we're building a whole bunch of apartments. That is not the solution. You're building, and it's primarily studios and 1-beds, right? Like that is not allowing people to, like you mentioned, stay there for a long period of time, because I don't know very many people that have 1 or 2 children that want to stay in a 1-bedroom apartment unless they had to. And that's not a desirable situation to be in, right? And that doesn't really create a sense of community when you have people stuffed into little tiny boxes and they're living a poor quality of life with a small unit where they can't even have like a 2nd proper bedroom or a 3rd proper bedroom. Even 2 plus a den is a substantially better experience than a 1-bedroom or a 1 plus den or something of that nature. So I don't disagree with that. But the second point to that, and this is where I'd love to get your feedback, is quite openly, I'm not going to talk about everything I own, but one of my properties that I own is a single family home in the Fraser Valley. And I've been debating, long term, like I don't ever really want to sell that piece of real estate. But when I sit there and look at it, the rent calculation for the amount of potential money that I would earn on this particular property, the way it's set up right now relative to my overall cost, or using that capital and putting it somewhere else, it doesn't make any sense. Like it wouldn't make a ton of sense for me to keep that and rent it out to a family, as much as I would love to put it in the hands of a nice family. And a big part of that is because, like what we're talking about right now, they're not making it easy to look at the potential of adding another dwelling on the property. And even if they did, it's like $350,000 to add like a 1-bedroom unit to the property. If I was to put a laneway house or not even a laneway, just a coach house or something of that nature, right? So I agree with you. The only things that we've seen here are federal government says here's $40,000 to help you add a basement suite, but it has to be under market rent and it has to be, all these different rules and restrictions. It can't be a family member for some reason I don't understand either, because why should that matter? And a variety of other things. So we're kind of getting off track.
Touch on that. Like, so I said 1 bedrooms. That's what Jamie would do. That's the low time involved, simple strategy. Yeah. The other side of Jamie, I'm James or Jamie, I answered both, is the single family. I mean, I can't help, but I like land. I'm biased towards land. And if someone is more into not just cash flow, but upside potential and values land, to me, there's a good argument to try to buy some, like right now with the current provincial announcement to change zoning and improve density. The way I would look at it is I would look at where can I get the best structure with the best access. And by access, I mean, like, let's call it Burnaby, somewhere with a back lane. Maybe it's a corner lot, but somewhere where you can access the lot easily from a parking standpoint. Parking is a big limitation currently under the zoning with what you can do. So if you buy a single family home, let's say you buy a 1950s or 60s post-war bungalow and you put a suite in it. So you have an up-down rental. That to me is a great investment, especially if it has a back lane and say it's on a 7,000 square foot lot in North Burnaby. It's going to be hard to justify that as a cash flow because when you look at it, yes, the rents are up, but it's still North Burnaby with expensive real estate. Maybe that costs 1.8 million. Maybe it's a little less, but let's call it around there. And you get 2 tenants in a dwelling. Comparing that to a 1-bedroom apartment, that's going to take up, from a cash flow perspective, let's just assume they work out the same. The house will take up more of your time. The tenants will stay longer. So you're more likely to eventually get lower market rates. But to counter that, the density may improve. You may be able to develop 4 to 6 units on that one day. And for someone that gets excited about future potential, well, you just bought a house that's 2,000 square feet. And under the current zoning, you can do 3,983 square feet. Let's just assume it's Burnaby R5 zoning. Under the future zoning, that 3,983 square feet might up to 8,000 square feet or 7,000 square feet. And so if you have 7,000 square feet of buildable space, that's a lot of upside potential. And if you decide to take that through, I mean, that could create 5, 6 family homes right there. I mean, 5, call it nice laid out 3 or 4 bedroom townhouses or row houses, for example. So to me, the ambitious wants to do a future project me would probably focus on a single family home with a basement with good access, whether it's corner lot or back lane. If you can get close to a busy bus route or a busy SkyTrain station, that's going to hedge your bets for density with the transit-oriented development areas that are coming into play. But it doesn't have to be. Ultimately, I just think access is important. Some of my favorite neighborhoods are North Burnaby right now. So, for the person with a budget between 1.5 and 2, that likes the single family approach, that likes the idea of an up-down rental, that likes a future development plan, North Burnaby is where I kind of spend my energy. So it's 1-bedroom condos or something like that, Alex. And I love the idea of building a 5-unit development on a 7,000 square foot lot in North Burnaby and renting them out and holding on to them. But I am concerned about the way the tenancy laws are going, and that would potentially hold me back from doing that.
Okay, so that leads. Thank you for that. That was really well explained. Appreciate that. I knew I could count on you to get to a really good point, and really solid information as far as why you would do that. Let's dig into that though. So you said, well, with the new tenancy laws, I don't know if I would consider doing that. Which leads me to my next point, which I don't know if you've put much thought into: the mass interprovincial migration and exodus from BC and Canada as a whole. Why don't we just touch briefly on just interprovincial, I guess, migration at this point right now? Since 2021, it's been a trend for people to move out to initially small towns, but late 2022 into 2023, we saw the mass exodus from British Columbia and Ontario to other provinces, primarily Alberta, but there are some in the East Coast that have taken on some of those folks. But nobody's lost more than Ontario, and a second would be BC, with Alberta, going through the roof right now. So what are your thoughts right now on investors saying, okay, no, I don't want anything to do with Alberta right now, or sorry, BC right now. I don't want anything to do with Ontario. I'm going to BC. You think that, or sorry, Alberta, sorry. We're going to Alberta. Do you think that's a play that makes any sense at this time? And do you think that's well founded, or people just going wherever the wind blows at this point right now? What are your thoughts?
I think we're lucky to live next to Alberta, quite frankly. Like I ran into a friend of mine at the airport in Calgary, and he loves it there. And he was, he grew up in Coquitlam, spent his whole life in the city, never thought he'd like to live outside of Vancouver. And ultimately, why people move, it's affordability that drives a lot of the moves. Okay, so ignore the investor. Let's talk about the family for a moment. The family that's going to Calgary is going there because they can afford a better home, and the one that can go to Edmonton can afford probably even a better home. But what that home also brings is more mental, like, peace of mind. More presence. This is this person just felt like they got their life back a little bit by relieving a financial burden. So if you have to go to Alberta to mentally clear your mind and just live in the moment a little better and have a better quality of life, that's a great reason to do it. And I think Calgary to me is, close to Banff, close to Fernie. It's got a lot of good stuff there. Yeah, it's a great option, but I still like BC. And, for me, I would go island bound myself. I love the island. I just think that we need to get all of our hipster business owners together and get them to choose a couple cities to move to so that they can start making a small city cool right away. And then the rest of us can follow. Because where the hipsters go is where we should all go. We got to follow those hipsters. But no, I think that the concern with BC is maybe it's taxes, maybe it's, you name it, affordability is part of it. I know Vancouver Island's not as affordable as Alberta, but it's a lot more affordable than Vancouver and Victoria. Well, sorry, Up Island is more affordable. So for me, I'd be going to north of Nanaimo on the island for affordability, but that's because I'm drawn to nature and water. And then the other... Okay,
so lifestyle dependent, obviously.
Lifestyle, yeah. There's numbers work far better. You go to Courtney Comox, you go to Parksville, you go to Campbell River. The numbers do work from a cash flow perspective far better than they do in Vancouver, but I'm sure they don't work quite as well as options in Calgary or Edmonton.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me, so from a family perspective, I've seen both. We saw, a mass group of people move a few years ago in 2020 to 2021. We did see a lot of our clients moving to Nanaimo, specifically Nanaimo and surrounding areas. There was a ton of people that said,
the new state?
I don't know, all over Nanaimo, man. It was just like up and down within an hour. Everybody was moving there in 2020, 2021. And that kind of slowed down. And we saw people move a little bit further North Island, like you're talking about, Cumberland, Courtney, Comox, that sort of thing. And we're seeing the odd person from time to time, really way less. It was in 2023 where we saw a migration to Alberta, like you mentioned right there. And I think, the feedback that I've received for most people that make the Alberta move, at least let's start last year, was predominantly to do with politics. That would, now being 12 years into my career, I don't think I'd ever seen so many people say, hey, politics and, BC versus Alberta, we like, aside from housing, the housing prices aside, the fact that Alberta aligns more with their beliefs system was huge. What space, like, people weren't necessarily moving to Calgary, they're moving to an hour outside and they're getting a huge chunk of land and so forth. That was the second thing. But, at the end of the day, I think it was a combination of all those things with what they perceived to be a lower cost of living, including things like, lower taxes and gas prices and so forth. So I think, that's one thing. But and BC obviously is what it is. So if you don't like the politics in BC, it is, vote differently or you have to leave. Like, that's what that is. So, but what I do want to come back to is that investment piece and the investor piece, because so investing in Edmonton is not something new, right? From a cash flow standpoint, we've been doing that for years and years and years and years and years. In fact, I think we started to see actually things really open up in 2020, I guess, because of COVID. It was much more virtual. People were starting to look outside, look at different areas. What do I do with my money? When property values started going up and they were refinancing for low rates, they were like, hey, where do I put this cheap money? And we saw people start to look in slowly, Calgary and then Edmonton. But a lot of people didn't want to go to Edmonton because there was no, appreciation, like you mentioned. So there's no value increases as time goes on. It had been stagnant for 10 or 15 years. Well, in the last 6 months, as you know, not only has Calgary basically rocketed up, price points have gone up kind of like they did here a few years ago, but now Edmonton is starting to see that growth pattern. And I'm getting calls daily. I'm licensed in Alberta as well, so we do mortgage financing out there. And I'm getting calls daily from people saying, okay, where do I put my cash right now? Where do I put my money? Best bang for buck, residential, somewhere around that $500,000 to $600,000 price point. And for a lot of folks are saying, well, I heard that I can buy, and it's true, a single family house in Edmonton in a decent suburb for $530,000 or $550,000, that's going to return me $3,300 to $3,500. Should I be looking at that as an option right now? Plus, as you know, and I think this is probably one of the biggest reasons that people don't start with, but eventually they start to get into, the tenancy rules there compared to BC, night and day.
I'm actually not familiar with the Alberta tenancy rules, so I can't be an expert on that today. But I think as you're talking about it, like, I think the thing, like for a guy like me, I get a big kick out of land going up in value, and land going up in value usually comes with, the city changing, our neighborhood getting more desirable. And the one thing that stands out to me in Alberta is I just wonder, and I don't know the market as well, but when I think of, okay, if I had the ambitions of adding value to land and building rental product out in Edmonton, for example, I'd probably be building townhouses, because I'd probably be wanting to build product for the stable income family. Maybe there's an angle to do 1-bedroom condos too, but when I think of that city, I think of more of a family, like I think a family tenant would pay a lot of money, and that would be a low risk housing option. Now out there, they have a lot of sprawl, so if you're going to build townhomes as housing, you're going to keep them as rentals, that you're adding value to the land, but I just don't know if that sprawl can keep happening. If you fly over Edmonton or Calgary, it's a lot of flat land that can still be developed on the outskirts. And so there's less pressure. I mean, Vancouver's landlocked. We're stuck between mountains and water. So land is fixed. And then out there, they have a little bit more sprawl and undeveloped land that could be developed. So there's less pressure, upward pressure on the land. And that would be the only thing that would get me less excited about it. But from a cash flow perspective, from a risk perspective and cash flow perspective, it makes a lot of sense. I just get drawn to the lifestyle of water and mountains, and I need to see those pretty things to, if I'm working on a job site or building something, I like to look at that while it's happening.
Well, this leads me actually, and thank you for saying that, and thank you for providing your opinion. So it leads me to a few key points here, and listeners really, take note of this. Number one, invest where you want to invest. Like, there's a lot of great options out there, right? You don't have to go to Alberta. You don't have to go to the island. You don't have to go to Burnaby. There's so many different places. I think people forget that, and they get it stuck in their head that they have to invest where they are or in where the market says they should go. But there's so many opportunities. You just have to decide which one. And the nice thing for you is, and I'm picking this up, but you could tell me I'm wrong here, is that you've just kind of clarified in your head, here's what I don't want to do, and here's what I do want to do, and here's what I'd like to be. And you can make that decision. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's obviously a fair point, as long as the numbers make sense to your point of view, right?
Yeah. I think I'll reiterate one of my founded principles: invest or buy or invest where you want to go. Like, if you don't want to go there to check on the property, it's probably not the place to invest. So, I mean, that helps. But yeah, saying investing wherever you want, I think one thing I would also like to share is this is an unprecedented time of zoning change potentially. So, the density announcement that's happened this year with the June 30th cutoff for small scale multi-unit zoning, and then the transit oriented development areas around SkyTrain stations and bus loops. We've never had a provincial push for this much rezoning so quickly. And I don't think it's going to cause all properties to go up, because there's just not enough people with money to, like, developers and builders are strapped right now. But it's going to create some opportunities in the city. And it's a better argument than ever before to just invest in a single family home with land. The only reason not to is if you don't have time and energy to maintain that property. But if you have the means, right now we're at 7.2% prime rate, and we are at archaic zoning, in my opinion, in a lot of areas, single family zoning. And if you just I don't say blindly buy this random piece of lot, but if you bought the generic, call it North Burnaby single family home that I'm talking about on a 7,000 square foot lot, and say you just held it for 3 years, you do nothing. And 3 years from now, you're going to have the potential angle, or say in that time, you just rent it upstairs, you rent it down. So you covered as much as your expenses, got as much cash flow out of that as possible. In the next 3 years after that, the hope is that there's the interest rates coming down that might push up prices. So we're at 7.2. Say that settles out one day back in the mid threes. I'd like to think there's going to be a lot of market gain between 7.2 and 3.5. Who knows how long that will take, and who knows what I don't know that might stop that market gain. But I think that there's a high probability of market gain in the years ahead. to add to that market gain from interest rates, there's the development kicker. And right now on a 7,000 square foot lot, you might be able to build a 4,000, or I said 3,983 in certain zonings, but let's call it a 4,000 square foot single family home. That 7,000 square foot lot might be able to build 7,000 square feet of 5 row homes. And when you look at development potential going up and interest rates going down, those are two big items that would cause prices to go up. So not a cash flow play necessarily, but an upside potential play. And if it's close to home, and that's what I'm drawn to. I think there's a lot more investors out there that have the means to buy one home than buy an apartment building or buy land to develop. So if you can't buy one home, then I would focus on 1-bedroom apartments myself. And if you want more than 1-bedroom apartments, then now's a good time and you have a little time and energy. I mean, it doesn't have to be North Burnaby. There's a rapid transit line going out to Cloverdale and Langley. There's so much land everywhere that will have higher and better use soon. So I like that as an opportunity for investors.
No, that was well said. Thank you. Okay, so closing thoughts on this, and I mean, perhaps we probably need more time to wrap our heads around this, but you've probably heard about the new capital gains taxes that have recently.
Yeah, I actually, I had a few conversations with clients on it. I don't know if it's going to. I mean, some people are going to get a bigger tax bill. I did some quick math on it, and I look. Okay, so a $500,000 cap gain. Yeah, your cap gains are the same up to $250,000. But after $250,000, they're going to tax 2/3 of it instead of half of it.
For personal tax gain, yeah.
Yeah, right. So personal tax gain. So I kind of look at that so someone that's got a $500,000 capital gain under the new tax laws is probably taking an increased tax hit about $20,000. The range could be, a variety. It could be a bigger range, but is that going to cause people to flood the market with listings? I learned in the last week, no. There might be a few listings that come because of it, but I thought, hey, this news might flood the market with listings, and it didn't necessarily happen. So I think it's just a bigger tax burden, unfortunately, for some people that might have the retirement in their home, but it is what it is. I mean, it still is based on a gain. So you're making money and you're paying taxes ultimately. I don't want to pay it out.
It sounds like being Canadian, man.
You pay taxes when you make money.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right. Well, I like the positive feedback from that perspective. My initial thoughts were that, yeah, like yours, once you dig into it, I think it's obviously not the worst, but it's obviously not ideal. And it will de-incentivize people. I think the sad reality is most single family or single unit or, less than 5-unit investors aren't typically, this isn't their business for the most part. This is an investment. And so they might not dig into the details, and they might just throw their hands up in the air and say, screw it, I want nothing to do with it. I'm going to either sell off before I see that value increase, which is obviously going to put less rentals in the marketplace. And they'll have a loss of the opportunity to earn some money from that perspective. But I digress. I mean, that's obviously a deep conversation for a lot of folks. I was just curious if you thought the market would flood or change, and you've answered that question.
I don't think the market's going to flood, but one thing I didn't mention is I talked about briefly on that 3-year idea, 3 years from now, prices will be higher than they are today. One thing I haven't been a fan of for a few years that I'm becoming a fan of is the pre-sale condo. So the pre-sale condo right now is looking better to me because it's completing at a time where rates will likely be lower and prices will likely be higher. So 3 years out. So, if you asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't have said go out there and get in line around the corner for that overpriced condo. But today, especially if you have if you can find something that's close to resale value, that's not too inflated as a new fluffy, fancy pre-sale presentation room, but something that's priced where it should be. I mean, I've seen some in East Van that I don't think they can launch these projects for any cheaper. And if you can get also those prices that I feel call it $1,250 a foot and up in East Van, that's kind of like the base that developers make money at. If you can get that at a 10% deposit structure with a completion in 3 years, that's a decent bet in my opinion. So that would be the
thing that kills me about that is they were trying to de-incentivize people from buying pre-sale properties as investments, which is obviously not a good idea in the first place. I know they were trying to de-incentivize people from flipping, but I don't disagree with you. I thought about this recently too. I'm like, okay, so we have this flipping tax, which means you have to hold for 2 years. But according to the information I received from a lawyer, the flipping tax starts the day you sign the contract. And if it's not ready for 2 years, then so be it. not a big deal. And if you can close on it, which you should always be able to close on it, like that's a huge issue I've seen in the marketplace, not being able to close. And we're seeing it like honestly weekly around here where people bought them and they couldn't close on them. But my point isn't that. My point is it's almost gone like full circle. Like, okay, we only want homeowners to buy them, but we need investors to buy them because they fund them and they provide rentals. And then all the rules surrounding that come back to, well, if you have less money, 10%, and you can get this pre-sale at today's values because you're looking at today's rates, you could do really well in a few years. I don't disagree with you. I think obviously there's no guarantees, but it certainly looks that way.
Pre-sales, it's an exciting time for a lot of opportunity in the city. I love that. It's a good time. It's a tough time to be stretched. It's a tough time to be having your mortgage payment doubled. But for an investor that has extra resources, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and it's an exciting time.
All right, you heard it there, folks. There is a lot of opportunity in the marketplace. I love the endless optimism, my friend. I always look at you as a realist because you don't, bullshit your way around things, and you talk about how they are. But every time I talk to you, I always hear about something you're working on or some opportunity, and I think it's just that's just a mindset that people have to be willing to adapt. So thank you for sharing a little bit of your mindset and 45 minutes of your time here today. If anybody wants to reach Jamie, of course, as always, the information is going to be in the show notes. Jamie's also got a podcast with a previous guest, Denny. They do a great job talking about all things Vancouver real estate. If you want to dig specifically into Vancouver real estate, I definitely recommend checking that out. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining today. We'll hopefully have you back again soon.
Thanks for having me on the show, Alex.
That was an unreal episode of The Flow. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did on my side right here. If you haven't already done so, make sure to check out all of the incredible resources that we have available. You can find us on Instagram at Flow Mortgage Co. You can find us on our website, getflowmortgage.ca. And of course, don't forget our free first-time homebuyer masterclass that's currently available on our website for anyone who listens to the episodes. And if you loved what you listened here today, the only thing that we ask for is to share this with someone else that you think this could help. And hey, maybe leave us a great review online.